Welcome to the UN Brief. I'm your host, Maya Plentz. Today we interviewed Dr. Martin Frick, Deputy to the UN Special Envoy on Food Systems. Thank you for watching the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe.
Was not the first food summit, but it was the first food system summit. And there's a big difference between the two because previous ones have focused on food security alone. And this summit has tried to look into all the interdependencies that are in the food system, from everything from labor conditions all the way to impact on nature and biodiversity. System Summit was convened by the Secretary General as an SDG summit. And the Secretary General has appointed Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the former Minister of Agriculture from Rwanda, as his special envoy. And I have served over the last month, almost 2 years now, as the deputy to Dr. Kalibata.
You are in the diplomatic corps of Germany, I understand, or you have worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for many years. I've taken a look at your very impressive CV. So can you tell us a little bit about your background too?
Well, I started as a German diplomat, and amongst other things, I was the German delegate in the Third Committee in New York, working on human rights and humanitarian issues. I served as the lead negotiator for the European Union under the German EU presidency in 2007, building the Human Rights Council, where I in particular looked into the Universal Periodic Review. I worked with Kofi Annan as his program director in his foundation, worked with E3G, an environmental think tank, and I'm with the United Nations since March 2015. First as climate change director of UNFAO, and then as senior director of UNFCCC, the climate secretariat. And now currently I'm working as the deputy to Dr. Kalibata.
So what are the main commitments that were issued during the Food Systems Summit?
Before I come to that, it's not only the environmental impacts. We also need to look at the fight against poverty, at livelihoods, at the situation of people working in the food system. It's unfortunate that 80% of the people who are food insecure are actually food producers. That's a parody. And some of the worst jobs you can have on this planet are actually in food systems. So there's the environmental dimension, but there's also very, very strongly the social dimension of food systems. And one staggering number is that 4.5 billion people depend on food systems for their livelihoods because they work in food systems, because they are daughters or sons of people working there. So food systems are the biggest employer on this planet as well. Now, this summit ended with a statement of action of the Secretary General, which is available online, spelling out all of the issues and opportunities in food systems to really become a driver of the achievement of the SDGs. But most importantly, 167 countries delivered national statements, many of those as a consequence of Food System Summit dialogues that the governments hosted, with national commitments, action plans, roadmaps, etc., to change the food systems in their countries. And that is quite a new model, that the UN is actually triggering national action at what is now more than 3/4 of the membership of the United Nations.
So what are some of these action plans that were being uptaken by the governments, the country members?
It's very different from country to country, depending on the priorities. Many countries, for example, want to pay much more attention and place more focus on school feeding programs. which are essential for getting children back to school. Many have suffered during the COVID crisis, but doing school feeding in a holistic way, which means not only bringing food to children, but bringing nutritious food, making sure that what the children are getting is balanced, but also ensuring that it's locally produced, that it's produced in a sustainable fashion. And that is the whole point about a food systems approach, not to be blind left and right on what you try to achieve, but trying to see and integrate the whole picture. Other countries have very much focused on sustainability. Denmark, for example, has just passed a new law in which they specifically look into the greenhouse gas emissions coming out of their agricultural model. Other countries, like Sahelian countries, might very much emphasize on reforesting and pushing back the desert, or at least stop the process of desertification. And in the Pacific Islands, for example, you have a big issue with obesity and non-communicable diseases, because food is largely imported, and much of the imported food is highly processed and really not nutritious. So there are efforts to better control the imports, to build the own agricultural system, to revive traditions in food that were lost. So the answers are as manifold as the countries of this planet.
That creates opportunities for technology transfer too, in terms of production. I'm thinking of large-scale production. For instance, Holland is quite good at irrigation systems and producing food in adverse conditions. If you have visited Holland, you see, throughout the countryside, they have several ways of growing their own food. So they are food sufficient and actually export to Europe. So I imagine there are many opportunities too in terms of technology transfer between countries, and not only north-south, but south-south, I imagine.
Absolutely. And that's a point I just wanted to make, because technology transfer is a very broad term. And quite often, indigenous techniques are most relevant for today's problems. Think about forest fire. We know of indigenous techniques like organized fires who are actually preventing big ones, or holistic grazing. If you have animals in forests, they clean up the underwood, which is fuel for forest fires. So in some instances, yes, it is about technology transfer. Giving farmers, for example, digital access helps for farmers to get everything needed, from very granular, precise weather forecast to market data where you can best sell your produce, to innovative programs where you can actually, for example, snap a picture of a plant and the app can tell you what the illness is this plant has, and can even advise what you can do with, simple homemade things to fix it. So digital inclusion definitely is a big ticket issue, but it's also very much about indigenous techniques and rediscovering what we have lost. For example, the variety of food has largely lost. The world is living on six staple foods, basically, when we are just now rediscovering the variety of grains, of pulses, of food that is available out there. And this variety not only helps biodiversity and the planet, it also helps people, because many of these varieties are much more nutritious, much more balanced than, let's say, processed wheat or rice or potatoes.
So what are you planning for COP26?
There is a whole variety of things going on. The special envoy will, of course, speak at COP26 and bring the energy of the Food System Summit in. We have been, over the last year, very intensively working with the UK presidency, both in terms of the negotiations, where we have supported the UK in making the point about nature-based solutions, saying that nature-based solutions basically mean food systems, because if you need to balance nature and people, right in the middle are food systems. But we have also worked with the climate champion, Nigel Topping, and Gonzalo Munoz from the previous presidency, who are very active advocates in bringing everybody who is a non-state actor into the climate world. And again, the food systems point is largely understood now. And it's really encouraging to see that we had 167 countries really speaking about food as a system. And that relates directly to the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And I think we can get a lot of energy for better NDCs by really thinking in a more holistic and in a more intelligent way about our food systems. And if people ask me, so what can I do about climate change, about biodiversity loss, about inequity, what have you? Almost all the time, the answer is watch what you are eating. Food systems matter, and your personal choices are relevant and are important.